Hello, everyone, and welcome today to our webinar. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome from wherever you are joining us. We are thrilled to have attendees and panelists with us from 5 continents today, actually. I am Tom Campbell, and this is the webinar Finance as a Service, co-hosted by FutureGrasp and the Business Analytics Institute. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few basic housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. At any time during the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit a question to today's presenters. To do so, just simply type your question in the Q&A at the bottom of the control panel. And as time allows, the presenters will address as many questions as they can during the Q&A sessions in each panel. We are recording this webinar and we'll share the link after the event. Dr. Lee Schlenker. And Dr. Lee Schlenker is principal at the Business Analytics Institute and a professor of business analytics. As a longtime senior manager for one of the big 4 consultancies, Lee's work has focused on helping managers and their teams understand how analytics can enrich their current roles and future careers. Lee's advised global corporations and taught graduate and management education's courses pretty much throughout the world. His expertise lies at the junction of management, analytics, and economics. And I've been personally impressed with Lee's exceptional communication abilities and strong capacity to help individuals and companies understand and strategize their digital transformation.
Thank you, Tom. Please allow me to introduce you in turn. Dr. Tom Campbell is founder and CEO of FutureGrasp, a global technology advisory group focused on emerging technologies' impact on business, geopolitics, and national security. Trained as an engineer, many of you know Tom through his work with senior policymakers in government and corporate leadership in the US and internationally. Beyond his domain expertise, I've been personally impressed by Tom's exceptional focus, bandwidth, and connections. In organizing today's conference on Finance as a Service, Tom and I have focused on the potential of using embedded finance to strengthen the retail industry's business and operating models, to better understand the customer journey, and to better manage organizational ecosystems. With this in mind, we have structured our agenda today around 3 major panels. We will begin with the business benefits of finance as a service. The second panel will focus upon leveraging data science. And finally, the third panel will discuss the consumer benefits and challenges. Each panel will consist of 4 expert speakers giving some introductory remarks, followed by a Q&A. In our first panel, we have Alex Mifsud, founder and CEO of Weavr, Andries Smit, founder and CEO of Upside, and Nigel Verdon, founder and CEO of Railsbank. Let's begin with Alex. Alex Mifsud has been a serial payments entrepreneur for the last 15 years. Before Weavr, Alexander also founded Xarius Technologies. Legend has it that his origins date back to the lost city of Atlantis. Along the way, he has found the time to co-found the Malta Internet Foundation, as well as the London Blockchain Foundation. Alex, the question I have for you is that you often speak of innovation and disruption. What are the advantages for retail organizations in positioning finance as a product?
Thank you, Lee and Tom, for having me. So there's a lot of talk about embedded finance now, and it's almost like emerged from this concept of banking as a service, and sometimes called also fintech as a service. I'd like to start really with positioning this as something much more broad than fintech. In fact, the opportunity for embedded finance, I think, dwarfs the opportunity for fintech. So that's what I really want to talk about in these sort of, if you like, opening remarks before we get to Q&A. So if we can move to the next slide. the opportunity that we see is actually no less than the transformation of services, the services industry, and by that I mean, the kinds of services that people do in their day-to-day life: education, health, employment, real estate, transportation, logistics, all the stuff in our lives that the service industry makes us function as modern consumers and businesses. And that opportunity is enormous. The US services sector is worth $15 trillion on its own. The UK economy, 80% of the UK economy is the services sector. Now, in trying to find sort of indications of the size of this, if you take the difference between e-commerce payment volumes, e-commerce being the shipping of goods bought online, and the overall digital payment volumes, we're looking at at least 5.2 trillion in online payments by 2024 will come from non-e-commerce activities. So you can start to see that however way you look at it, this opportunity in services is of a staggering scale globally. And so it's certainly it's certainly sort of almost like an unexploited hinterland here for financial services to start building services and revenue streams and value creation as the financial services world meets the digital transformation world into these services industries. So we can move to the next slide. Okay, so let's unpack what that means in practice. Embedded finance is in itself, when it meets these industries, isn't the proposition in itself, but it's a very powerful engine for creating disruption. So if you take traditional services sectors, I mean, travel is one of them, transportation, logistics, as I describe here, you can see how second generation digital businesses, say Airbnb, disrupting the accommodation industry that has already been disrupted and digitized by, say, Booking.com. The big difference, the embedding of finance in the way Airbnb works, means that they can provide a much more connected customer experience, a much more automated and efficient back office, and even then moving into the supply chain, being able to offer insurance and loans into, for example, to the hosts to improve their properties. So you start to see the creation of something which is much more value capturing and value creating than simply the digitization of the delivery of a service. And the same thing plays out in the transportation industry with Uber. It plays out in the logistics industry with disruptors like FlightHub, and so on and so forth. So I mean, a good question to ask yourself is, how will embedded finance enter my industry, and how will it disrupt it, and what can I do about it? Is it something in the customer experience, having the front end be offering financial services at the point of need? Or is it in the back office to automate a lot of the stuff that is done by human beings, perhaps done inefficiently and in an optimal way? And can it also create huge value in the supply chain by providing working capital, by providing insurance to the different suppliers, and therefore making that supply chain work much more efficiently and effectively? All that value that is created can be captured and turned into disruptive power. Right? That is the kind of promise and the engine of embedded finance in these services sectors. So again, what I want to emphasize here, the opportunity isn't in financial services. The opportunity is in the embedding of financial services into these many different service industries. So we can move to the next one. Okay. Now, what's the genesis of this value? Where does it come from? And why does adding embedded finance make a business more competitive? And there are really three key drivers here. The first one is that when you add more value, you acquire more customers, right? People value your service more, they will choose your service. I mean, the Uber effect and the Airbnb effect is very clear. Uber makes it super convenient. They remove the worry about how you're going to pay the driver, have you got the right change. They make it easy for the driver to collect the money to get the job, but also to be paid for the job. And having additional service on that, such as working capital for fuel, for example, or to improve the car. Once they acquire more customers and deliver more value to them, they also have, and uniquely from financial services, it's much easier with financial services than most other ways of creating value to monetize it. You're handling money, you can get revenue shares, you can get, you can charge additional for the service in terms of a markup. You can make all sorts of revenue streams, such as interchange in the world of cards. So it's very, very easy in the world of embedded finance to actually extract incremental revenue streams from the value you're creating. And then finally, because you're embedding financial services into another set of services, you actually create high switching costs for your customers to go elsewhere. Once your customers have had the experience of being integrated, then it's very kind of inconvenient for them to go and do it separately thereafter. So basically, you get much better loyalty, much better stickiness, and you also up the ante for everybody else in your industry to come and have to follow you. So embedding finance, again, is a powerful engine and gives you this sort of competitive power. Okay, let's move to the next one. So if this is so great, why isn't everybody doing it, right? And why now? Why is embedded finance starting to become exciting now? And there are some really good reasons behind that. First of all, payments and banking has never been as capable and as accessible as now. There are APIs for absolutely everything. There are many more rails. The payment methods and the banking methods are ever more powerful with the digital wallets, with the different types of real-time payment rails, with open banking. These are all great things for being able to create the kind of solutions I've been describing in any industry. Of course, this creates a challenge in itself. How do you choose? Which ones do you pick? And so now we're moving from a problem of access to a problem of complexity. It's complicated, and if you get it wrong, you will find out it's wrong many months, many years later, and it's an extremely expensive decision to be taking. Then, even once you've made the decision, you are going to have to build it. Then you're sourcing the vendors. You're going through something which is quite complex and delicate and requires specialist knowledge to deal with transactions, with security, with compliance. And again, the way you build it has a lot of implications for how much extraction of value you get from the future. How easy is it to change? How will you adapt it? Have you built the right thing? And then finally, having built it, you've got to run it. And that's, again, another layer of complexity and cost on your business. You're probably going to have to hire people who are specialists in running payment solutions and banking solutions. They're going to be compliance people looking at customer onboarding. You're going to have people who understand risk. You're going to have specialists who are going to be able to talk the language of the financial institutions you are partnering with. And so again, it's a challenge to basically operate efficiently the solution you have built. So great opportunity, great disruptive power, great potential for creating competitive advantage in practically any service industry. But at the same time, it's a very, very high barrier to do it and to get it right. Even though now, for the first time ever, all of these component parts, if you like, have become accessible at scale. So I'd like to really move on. If we go to the next slide, really want to move on in terms of how do we get there, right? And I'd like you to think about, when e-commerce started, it was as challenging for the first e-commerce merchants and the first e-commerce platforms to solve the problem of taking a piece of software, the web browser, and enabling that web browser to take sensitive financial data, typically a credit card number, and have a consumer submit that data to a piece of software, and that software going to a merchant that the consumer will never have spoken to or checked out, and actually charge the card and make e-commerce happen, right? Those challenges were daunting then to do. Security challenges, challenges of fraud, challenges of governance, challenges of fulfillment. In the last 25 years, the industry, technology, banking, and many other parts of the value chain have created solutions to this. And this is where we need to get to with embedded finance. And I would say that the 3 bits of the agenda for us to think about in the next few years is, first, how do we radically reduce complexity? There are many APIs out there. There's something like 800 payments APIs on programmable web. Each of them have lots of complexity to get your head around. How do we make it simple enough so that somebody running a SaaS business that's trying to help doctors do their job better can actually embed finance into that SaaS platform without having to understand all the complexity of financial services? So the first thing we have to solve for is radically reducing complexity. The second is to solve the security and compliance problem. We cannot expect, just like in e-commerce, we don't expect merchants to be security experts. We don't expect them to be compliance experts. We don't expect them to be credit card and financial services experts. In a very similar way, we have to solve the problem of security and compliance. That when you plug something in that comes from an embedded finance provider, you don't have to understand it. You don't have to worry about or take any responsibility for the security and the compliance of the financial services that's being provided through your application or through your platform. And I think the third thing is to make sure whoever is building, particularly in this early phase, when we're at the start of this emerging new way of delivering financial services, is to build for change. It's very expensive to build the first things, especially while the kit is not mature. And if you build it into rigid way, you've spent a lot of money. You realize what you need to get right once you've actually rolled it out in anger, and then you have to go and build it again. So you have to be able to build in a way that gives you flexibility to make experiments, to experiment and to iterate. Now, the financial service industry has not been very good at this. It tends to be quite monolithic. You spend many years, many months and years building it, you certify it, it's done, and you run it, right? We have to create tools that make it possible for people to do, for companies and innovators to do experiments in embedded finance, do something, tweak it, iterate it, get this into customers, and keep evolving it so that we really get to the heart of the value that embedded finance can deliver.
Let me ask that we hold the questions until the Q&A session. Given the number of participants, if you could ask your questions down in the discussion section, we will take 3 to 4 questions during the Q&A and send all of your questions to each of the panelists. I'd like to move on to introduce Andries Smit of Upside. Andries has 20 years experience in leading financial service organizations across the globe. Andries is the former managing director of Global Digital Factory of Weavr, as well as having founded the SME Discounts, Daughter Decks, and AE Ventures. Beyond what he's learned at Oxford, Andries' appreciation of the customer has been formed in his work in the United Kingdom, Canada, South Africa, and Asia. Andries, you suggested that embedded finance is a key to better understanding the customer journey. What is the business case for facilitating the customer journey? Andries Smit.
Excellent. Thank you, Lee, for that very kind introduction, and thank you, Tom, for having us here today. I hope I can share some insights over a very interesting career in many different continents and places, especially in Weavr. I was tasked with a wonderful challenge of using embedded finance, whatever that meant 5 years ago, into driving more customers and better customer experience. So my goal today is to build on what Alex has just shared, which I thought was excellent, and really just share some practical examples of what we see and what we do to unlock this opportunity. To position Upside a little bit is we sort of use embedded finance, specifically open banking, as a solution for loyalty. And I'm going to show you just what kind of powers that gives to retailers to drive new customer loyalty, but also the lifetime value from that. Lee, can you go to the next slide, please? Excellent, thank you. Before we do, I always try and believe that it's really important to understand what are the current key things that's front of mind for retailers. So over the last 15 months or so, we've had over 110 conversations with different retailers, national grocers, subscription service, fashion, online, offline, coffee shops, you name it. And these are the 6 common themes that keep coming up as front of mind problems for them to solve, with the context that they are looking for embedded finance solutions. What can we do to use this? Now, what's quite interesting, before I tackle each one of these briefly, is that when we say embedded finance, or when I have these conversations with retailers, they tend to think of it, as Alex mentioned also, as what financial products can I inject in my journey? Can I sell insurance? Can I refer a credit card? Can I do a buy now, pay later scheme? But that is really only scratching the surface of what, in my opinion, the opportunity is for embedded finance. And I'll come back to that in a short bit. But when you hear the common problems, don't just think product. COVID has changed behavior, whether you like it or not and believe it or not. What we're seeing in the data is that nearly 40% of customers have switched brands. And if you understand that actually what we're seeing in customers' data is that there are only 25 to 30 brands that they are really loyal to. They'll make the ad hoc impulsive buy from a shop where they are near or just happen to be in proximity. But there's only 25 to 30 brands that they really stay loyal to and buy frequently from. If 40% of your loyal customer base shifted over the last 12 or 15 months, that is a significant problem. And I'm going to give you a quick example as to how embedded finance can help solve that. The other expectation that keeps coming up is omni-channel. I mean, it's sort of a hyped and many mentioned time that, you know, everything is going online and customers buying online and shops are closed and locked down. So I'm not going to dwell on that. But it is important to understand that customers' expectation of the experience is altered. They no longer think of going to the stores or buying online as 2 separate activities or 2 separate things. Whether they buy online and complete there, whether they click and collect, they just expect it now to work. And the brands which have embraced this have seen significant improvements over the last 12 months, is what the data shows us. Sustainability and social responsibility. I just read a report by Paul Martin. He's the head of global retail at KPMG, and he calls this out as one of the top 4 consumer trends that they've observed over the COVID period, and they believe it will sustain. So no longer can we just turn a blind eye. We have to embrace purpose and sustainability in our retail conversations and experience that we deliver to the customers. Privacy and convenience. One interesting thing I just want to share from our learnings, whenever we talk about data or embedded finance and there's financial data involved, all the retailers I have a conversation have an immediate resistance. They are really concerned, and the obvious question always is, but do people trust us, you, me? Will they share their data? And they are quite skeptical about it. Now, the interesting thing is that we are seeing is that if the consumers do not trust that brand, they will not share at all. However, when a brand is trusted, people share more than they've ever shared before. So the objective here, and again, embedded finance, Alex alluded to this, is being that trusted source for the consumer, having the wallet, having the money right there, builds a whole new level of trust and embeddedness with that customer and making them come back for more. I'm not going to dwell on marketing effectiveness or cookies, but it's a real impact. iOS 14 removing IDFA tracking, Chrome, Google Chrome cutting down on third-party trackings means that marketing effectiveness is not as good as it used to be, and the trend will continue down. However, understanding financial data, understanding where people spend can be the antidote. In fact, it can actually enhance how, when, and where you reach and speak to your customers. Next slide, please. Thanks, Lee. While that continues, I'm going to focus on two things around the value of embedded finance. The one is the frictionlessness of the experience. And then secondly, I'm also going to talk about the incremental profitability that the data can drive. Now, just to set the context here, and again, Alex alluded to this, when we say embedded finance, people tend to think about the infrastructure of finance, whether it is APIs or wallets or e-money transfers or payments. Actually, there's a whole layer of value that lives on top of that infrastructure. Absolutely, that infrastructure was necessary to bring us to this point. But now, as retailers and as business, there's a whole new level of value to be unlocked. What we've got here on the screen is a simple illustration of what consumers expect today. They expect things to be clear, connected, so I can pick whichever bank or service or loan, whatever the product is that's involved in your use case, needs to be right there and accessible. They want to be positively engaged and reminded as to when there is a notification upcoming, something they have to do, or a delight. But they want the communication in a very different way, not in old school email spam where it's sort of irrelevant, unclear. Now, the beauty of embedded finance, and when I say that, I mean specifically around having transactions and payments understanding of the consumer, is that you can be more relevant. You know exactly when they've shopped, you exactly know where they've shopped, you know exactly what they've bought. Not just in your own ecosystem, but in every other part of the ecosystem in which they spend. And that is a next level of understanding and helpfulness to that customer. It's also very important, just on the last screen, I've deliberately put that in there because there's a bit of a paradox when it comes to lock-ins. When you think about embedded finance, or when you think about having a wallet inside your business or your retailer, what we've seen and heard directly from customers is quite a bit of a paradox. The more you lock them in, the less they would want to be part of it. The easier you make it to take money out or redeem or leave, cancel your service, your subscription, actually, the more loyal they tend to be. The longer they tend to stay, the longer they tend to leave their money within your ecosystem or their data within your ecosystem. Lee, next slide, please. Now, that's great in terms of the customer's experience. And as users, we all know and love those kinds of experiences. But actually, it's really important to understand the data or insights opportunity that embedded finance brings. Whether you're plugging in payment services and you can see payments data, whether you build on top of open banking and you see that kind of data, there is real actionable insights that drives value throughout your organization, whether it is, like Alex said, the supply chain, whether it is an acquisition, who to go after, which segments work, but also how do you maximize existing customers that are in your store or on your website already. The reason why digital companies like Amazon perform so well and can fund things like delivery and refund costs is because they understand deeply what the customer loyalty and lifetime value is. They are willing to sacrifice short-term profit or margin because they know all the add-on services and expanse that happens across that. And that is made possible because of the embedded financial elements that they have, the wallets, the cards that they've linked, etc. Imagine being a coffee shop and knowing that Andries drinks I don't know, $80 worth of coffee a month, a real number, unfortunately. Now, that gives a very different approach in terms of how much they're willing to spend to get Andries on board, because they definitively know what the lifetime value is of such a customer, which is very different from, for instance, my wife, which don't drink coffee at all, and they would be wasting their marketing dollar trying to bring her in as a customer. That's the kind of beauty, if you understand your customers deeply, not just those that are in your store, but how they behave elsewhere, that it can unlock. Lee, if you mind passing on to the next one. I know these graphs are tiny, they're not meant to be visible other than just cues, but what it also brings is when you start getting really sophisticated with financial data, again, if you can use open banking and you see it across various different places, spaces, and brands, then the facilitation is that you can see how you are relatively performing down to a store level. Is your store in London, Liverpool Street performing better or worse than your other stores or peers? Because in your own POS systems, you might be able to tell whether it's performing relative, but do you know whether your average transaction value matches or whether your total spend per customer matches? What it also allows you to do is understand customers throughout without them having to have a loyalty card that keeps track of who Andries is. By using embedded data, you can follow and understand a specific customer's behavior end to end, not just when they tap a loyalty card or even if they've signed up to it. Next slide, please, Lee. It's also, as I already sort of alluded to, understanding the whole of market. It's great to see that groceries, you might be in a grocery and you might have gained 10% during last year. Fantastic. Actually, you've underperformed the market. Understanding real-time data of benchmarking against your share of market, your share of wallet, your share of footfall is critical, and embedded finance can give that to you, that understanding across the piece. So I'm nearly done. Last slide, please, Lee. And this is really just a summarizing of everything I've already said. Please don't think of embedded finance as a way to stick some finance product in your journey, to sell insurance or a credit card or a loan and so forth. It's way more than that. It is how you can reach new customers, talk to them in the language and the time of when they want to, give them new experiences, which is frictionless. Some of you might have seen Amazon's Fresh that launched in London, and it's decently big in the US already, where consumers can just walk in and walk out and the payment is already completed, right? That kind of frictionless is going to be the new norm in the next few years, where customers will expect that for us. And you can unlock that with opportunities already today. Omnichannel, you don't have to and should not behave in a way where in-store and online is different, because consumers don't think like that anymore. Being able to track across different payments, banks, whichever way consumers want to, should be possible. And then just to end the last one, real-time actionable insights, right? The data is there. Please don't think that that suddenly means you need these massive IT integration projects. That is not true. But the data is available there, and if you can convince customers to trust you enough to share that with you, it will set your business on the next level. Thanks, Lee. If you move to the last one, that is me done.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andries. I would like now to introduce Nigel Verdon of Railsbank, a well-known fintech entrepreneur who has founded 3 successful firms: Evolution, Currency Cloud, and most recently, Railsbank. He sits on the board of Excess Options Hedge Fund and was previously a partner at Finch Capital. Rumor has it that he is as good playing the guitar as he is at finance. Both require understanding how to put the notes together. Nigel, the question I have for you, is how can organizations measure the success of their efforts in embedded finance? Nigel Verdon.
Thank you for the introduction, Lee, and for Tom for the invitation. Yes, my name's Nigel Verdon. I'm CEO and co-founder of Railsbank, and this journey of what is called embedded finance today is probably best start with a parallel industry. To create embedded finance, you've got to have an industry componentized into its fundamental core pieces, and those pieces being made as digital product. And if you think of it from a finance world of an account, send money, a receive money, a spend money, a collect money, those are the components. Issue insurance policy, redeem policy, those are all individual components you can use to build financial experiences on. And if you look at the music industry, as Lee was saying, I said to my father when I was 18 I was going to be a professional musician, and he just said to me, "Don't tell your mother." And that was sort of telling to me, as in, Nigel, you can play the guitar, but you're not going to be like your buddies who you play with. They're all going to be famous, you're not. And so I decided to change a music career, but I've been involved with the music industry outside of work and also sometimes within work for the past 30 years. So when Apple came along with the iTunes, they had deconstructed the industry into a single track and a digital track. And that track was priced at 99 cents. And that track then could be streamed, and all sorts of things could be done with it. You didn't have to buy an album with 20 songs, sorry, $20 for just one song you happen to like. So before the iTunes, the music industry was totally on its knees. The labels were losing money. The musicians weren't being paid huge amounts and everything. And the heyday of the 60s, 70s, and 80s was coming crashing down. So post the iTunes, what happened to the industry? It allowed the consumer to go direct to the artist and artist direct to consumer without a label because of digital distribution, and the underlying product, being a track of some sort, was digitally distributed and super cheap. You didn't have to have a printing press or a record press or tape recording, all that type of infrastructure. You could just deliver directly. It became frictionless as well. Look at the way our generation consumes music now, and our kids and everything. I remember showing my kids the first time, as in Rough Tape Records on Brick Lane, showing my daughter how to fast forward a record. And she was brought up in the iPod generation. She was shocked when the guy in the store moved the needle with his finger, and that was fast forward. It's a different concept. Now you just hit the button. And essentially music became embedded. And hopefully that can show you in parallel that by deconstructing an industry to components, making those components available, changing the economics of the industry, and changing the way the industry fits together, so there's new structures, etc. You restructure the industry to generally be for the benefit of the consumer and also for the industry, so they can make money, because if they can make money, they can do better consumer experiences. And that's what happened in music. That's what's happening today within the finance world. Industry has really been restructured into balance sheets with APIs, and they're called banks. And people at SEB are taking a leading light in that. Goldman Sachs are taking a leading light in it. Capital One are taking it. And they're realizing, hey, we've got the main asset here, which is capital. We need different distribution models. So let's make that available for APIs and allow platforms like ourselves to be able to embed that capital into a customer experience as well. So what's that actually mean for the customer? I think Andries really talked through the consumer and the consumer behavior, because consumer behavior drives everything. And then the customer is really trying to hook into consumer behavior or change consumer behavior. And so in the past, using finance as a tool
to change consumer behavior or respond to consumer behavior was a massive capex cost or opex cost. Marks and Spencer's, for example, if I remember rightly, they're an agent bank of HSBC. What's that mean? It's probably $5 million to set it up and an opex cost of 3 to 5 per year. And also you inherit the legacy processes and technology of that banking partner. And hence you're just as good as the worst processes and the worst digital experiences that they happen to have, because you're just sitting on legacy. And so the embedded finance value to let's say the merchant, to the brand and others, is to take that capex cost, that opex cost, remove legacy, and remove the hassle of regulation, remove the hassle of operations, etc., as my colleague Alex mentioned. And therefore, that frees you up to be able to run experiments like a lean startup with consumers, respond to how their behavior may change. And then you can create sort of use cases where you, as the brand or the merchant, are in control of the experience of your consumer. Whereas beforehand, if you did a credit card introduction, you then suddenly hit the legacy platform of Green Dot or Capital One or whatever experience, or JP Morgan Chase, which was a terrible experience. And so you had this beautiful customer experience. You say, have one of my credit cards, and suddenly you're in the treacle and you're out of the world of frictionless and you're in the total world of friction. That has now changed, where you can get bespoke embedded credit cards, and we do that in the United States, and we're launching that in Europe towards the end of the year. So these use cases now that you can deliver, like buy now, pay later, payroll advancing, turn reward points into spend intelligence, remove friction from reward points, you can abolish the catalog, which everybody hates, and make it open loop so you can spend them somewhere else. All that, you as the brand and the real values are in charge of your customer experience, and you can use finance to influence and respond to consumers. And so by doing that, that gives you a couple of things as a real massive benefit. And it's coming back to, what do you measure? Revenue. For example, if you were starting up, say Monzo again, or Revolut or TransferWise, and I helped put those the TransferWise and Revolut in business, my last company, Currency Cloud, so I remember them as PowerPoint decks. They and a lot of that first fintech sort of wave after the credit crunch in 2011, 2012, the acquisition costs are very much funded by venture capital. And they've become big companies, they're great management teams, and they're doing extremely well. But one of the key things there is, if you've already got 5-10 million customers, you don't have to have an underwritten customer acquisition cost. You can still sell financial services to them and be in control of it. And so you do have extra revenue streams without the downside of the one-by-one acquisition cost, which essentially, that's why Zoom was sold eventually to PayPal, because they couldn't get their CAC cost down. So, because they didn't have the customers. So being able to put finance into the power of the brand, and there's a great expression, my head of the United States, head of North America, used to run Green Dot over there, is bank with the brands you love, or do finance with the brands you love. So there's a revenue opportunity because you have customers, and because customers love that brand and trust that brand. Coming back to one of the points earlier about trust, is a massive motivational behavior. Would I, as a Nike freak, I'm not, I'm more Adidas, as I was a Nike freak and I really trust Nike all the time because I wear their clothes and etc., I wouldn't have much issue taking credit card off them at all. And then in return from that, what's Nike get? Nike can give me sort of reward points, they can give me benefits and other things to give me more stickiness. So one of the benefits that's measurable from embedded finance, stickiness of customer and ability to interact with that customer. Another next benefit is obviously revenue, which you can get more revenue streams out of that. And probably the most valuable thing you have as a brand using embedded finance as well, apart from stickiness, is data. And for example, if you are a supermarket and you have a closed loop reward point system, you can only really see reward points redeemed from the stupid catalog you have, which nobody uses because nobody wants like neon orange toasters, except for a small segment. So that's also in the catalog. But that data, why shouldn't that data open loop your reward points card and let it be used within your competitors? That's an interesting concept, because immediately you can see money being spent because you've given them reward points and allowed them to spend them in competitors. They're suddenly buying their baby goods in the competitor, and you realize, oh, they've just had a child. Baby goods are cheaper, say it's at Aldi rather than say Sainsbury's. And if you're able to do that, you can then put offers to those already customers of yours to say, hey, if you're back to Sainsbury's, you can buy, we'll give you special offers on baby goods. That means Sainsbury's then still keeps the weekly shop, which is where the margin is as well. So you can use that data to influence customer behavior. So you can measure that if you open it up, if you have the data, if you have the ability to create stickiness, you can really see and engage and better understand and interact and respond to your consumers, because you're using finance in a way that doesn't impact it's your customer journey, doesn't impact the customer, it's frictionless. It doesn't, your spend on this, you're not going to spend on all the legacy. For example, people in Railsbank have got a neobank up and working in 8 days. As opposed to if you're getting a bank if you're going agent banking, it's going to take you 2 years. So from 8 days to 2 years, a phenomenal thing. Instead of like 5 million, you've got 200K. It's a massive change on pace, and that's your investment cost to run these experiments, because you can, and the new experience. So that's how we look at the world of embedded finance. And I think it's just a combination of both what Alex and Andries, who Alex, bizarrely enough, in the past, his original business partner, Damon Hart Davis, was a very old colleague of mine. We used to own the fourth ISP in the UK together. And Andries I'm delighted to have as a customer of ours. So it's wonderful to be on a call with these guys. And hopefully that's given the audience a little bit more insights into the why embedded finance is here, and why industrial and industry change is going to be driven by this, the same way that the iTunes changed the music industry. The finance industry is now going to be changed in a way we haven't seen before.
Thank you, Nigel. Let's then open up to a question and answer session. I would like to ask the participants to ask the questions in the discussion section, and we will share 2 or 3 questions with the panelists. I would like to begin, Alex, Andries, and Nigel, with a question about bounded rationality. The retail industry, much like banking and finance, is dictated by business and operating models and best practices. When you're suggesting embedded finance, you're suggesting about looking at the business differently. How can you nudge business decision makers along to see your point of view?
Sure, it's I'm happy to give a few comments on that.
Please.
It's showing people the art of the possible is one of the key things. And if you show the art of the possible of where they can innovate and make change, they will run experiments to make change. I think Alex brought it up at his first talk about embedded finance allows you to do rapid experiments, because you've got a toolbox and you can do things without a huge capital outlay and anything, and super fast to run stuff. So it'll be, some companies will say, we do it this way and it will always be this way, and they're called Kodak. And look what happened to Kodak. And there'll be others who will say, we'll do it this way, and people like Fuji are still in business. And Kodak was one of the biggest innovators in the world at the time. So it's about sitting with people, showing the art of the possible, ideate, I hate the word ideating, but ideating together, and working out what's meaningful and what experiments can you do and take some risk with consumers. And I'm not a consumer guy. Andries is a consumer guy, so he's probably got more insights than me on this.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. And Lee, to the question, I'll very shortly just add, it's about testing it. Having come from very large organizations, the moment anybody thinks this is an IT project and needs funding, it's dead. It is just as simple as that. So the more you can chunk it up in, like Nigel said, small experiments, little tests on the side, and then you start building the business cases. You know, embedded for me means it's the end of a journey, not the start. So you embedding tiny bits as you go.
Yeah, I mean, I would add a couple of thoughts to that. You know, and the beauty of embedded finance, it's always incremental to the value. So if you think about buy now, pay later, for example, you know, it's not the full service. You're trying to buy something, or your customers are trying to buy something, and you're providing finance at the point of decision making. And you know, we all know from car finance that anyone who offers car finance on the forecourt is actually going to sell more cars, basically. And this is true of buy now, pay later. That's why merchants have enthusiastically adopted it, right? I'm not necessarily saying it's the best thing since sliced bread, because I think there'll be some downsides to buy now, pay later. And that's kind of at the front end, but also in the back office. Sometimes you're going to appeal to quite different people. You know, if you can tell a CFO, if I automate your back office payments and optimize them, because now once they're automated, they can be optimized, you're going to improve your margin by 20-25%. You know, it's a different audience. It's a CFO looking at the back office rather than a chief product officer looking at what the customer proposition is. Those are two examples of embedded finance that, you know, you're selling them on the basis of the transformational power to the business. If you can put that side of the equation with the low barrier to integration, which is what Andries has just said, then you've got the makings of getting decision makers to buy in. But it's not. I think it's not just one or the other. You've got to solve for both: ease of access, ease of embedding, and the actual value prop that is delivered through the embedding of finance.
Just take that little thing about not being an IT project. Everybody calls Amazon a technology company. They're actually a logistics and warehousing company that just happens to have a marketplace and an ability to payments and everything. And so if you looked at them in real detail, the thing that makes them different, which I think all of us have been saying, is they're frictionless. And they're frictionless by automation and looking at the world from like an engineering perspective, rather than the world of non-engineering. And engineers tend to look at it in a sort of perspective of how can I get this from A to B in the most effective way and do the minimum amount of work to get it there. And that's the difference between, I had said, a lot of the banking world, which has ended up, and I'm an ex-banker for my sins, of throwing headcount at it, throwing money at what's called digitization as opposed to going digital. And just another observation, Amazon doesn't have, neither does Google, neither does Facebook, a chief digital officer on that. And that's a reflection that on the board, you don't have people who actually understand digital. And that's only 3%, I think, of banks throughout the whole world of anybody on the board that actually has some digital chops and understands what digital actually means. And so as soon as you appoint a chief digital officer, you've lost the game anyway. And so it's also about understanding a digital world as opposed to a digitized world is what it's about. And and brands tend to understand that better. And that's why I think it's quite exciting, this whole embedded finance world. It's brands and other merchants, they get digital, very much so. And hence they can see finance, another tool, another component they can put in their customer experience, and they can make that digital like Amazon and others, knowing that they've got a warehousing, they've got a production operation, they've got factories producing their goods and everything, and they've got a complete supply chain. If you look at kind of that retail store that can get stuff out from the catwalk to the consumer in about a week, they understand digital. So put finance in their hands, and you've got a radically different way of looking at the finance industry.
We have time for 2 more questions. I wanted to pick up on Nigel's latest reference, but both Andries and Alex also talked about reducing the friction in the financial process. Sometimes we confuse financial value with customer value. Sometimes we talk about reducing the friction in transactions versus reducing the friction in interactions. All three of you seem to be suggesting that we can use embedded finance to influence perceptions of customer value by reducing the frictions in interactions. How exactly can we do that?
I'll just use a classic example. Sign up for a credit card in most places in the US, and you've got this wonderful experience going through Robinhood or another experience. Then you crash into JP Morgan Chase's friction, and it's just a nightmare. And so that's a combination of two things, both of what you're talking about, transactional friction and experience friction. And so because you're taking it down to individual components, JP Morgan and the other people who do these white label type things or co-brand things, they haven't componentized. They've still got LPs. And so you've got to take the whole bloody LP, play it, find it for the customer, as opposed to just taking a track and just putting it there. And that's the real difference. It allows you the flexibility to build however you want that experience to fit in your experience. So transactionally it's better, experience-wise it's better, and that's how you can remove friction. It's all about taking it down to individual components, digital components.
I would add something to what Nigel said. You know, beyond the sort of front end, there's also lots of frictions that happen sometimes in the actual plumbing. So we're working with a customer that is presenting basically training content to employers, right? So and they would typically present LinkedIn training content, Udemy, more traditional providers, and what they realized was that these different providers all need to get paid in slightly different ways. You know, some need to get paid through a card, some direct debit, some have a bank push, and they also found that often the employees also want to pay more than the employer is paying for their training because they really want to get a certification program and actually want to pay themselves as well. When you analyze all of these flows, they can get quite complicated. And so to provide a really kind of frictionless experience where an employer is buying into their huge catalog of content, puts a budget in and lets the sort of system take care of all the details, you can't really deliver that unless you do the underlying plumbing, which is quite complex, you know, collecting money from the corporates, from the employee as a consumer, putting it in the form that the content provider wants to get paid with, doing all of that stuff. Should ideally be done behind the scenes with no one realizing what's going on. You know, it's like the below the waterline on the iceberg. There's a lot of stuff there that you don't see. You just see the tip, which is you know, shining resplendent in the sun. So there's a front side of embedded finance, but also very much a kind of interior plumbing side of embedded finance that removes friction.
Yeah.
Same thing. If you look at exactly that, if you look at Amazon's warehousing operations and the distribution operations, they're world class on it compared to others. It's the same thing. They removed all the friction in the back office. They're a phenomenal company. Even Bezos will say he's not a tech company; he's a logistics company.
Okay, final question for this session. Which are the use cases in embedded finance that have seen the highest ROI from applying AI?
I'll give us a start, but there are a plethora of it. And again, I think the conversation will err on there are front-end value, so product value, but then there is also huge operational efficiencies driven by AI. So I'll start with the former, just above the line. So Lee, the simplest way I think about it is where there are large or high ticket items and AI has just taken out some of the friction, right? So loans, that was great benefits. In my background in insurance, we did a lot about understanding the right person in pricing, what's the right price to offer them, but also what's the claims ratios and what is the propensity to claim. All of that has to happen within 4 seconds. Otherwise, you just don't either hit the customer or get ranked on the aggregators. So that is AI in a financial embedded machinery at scale, and you know, sort of on a superpower perspective. We talked about things like buy now, pay later. Any one of those products where there's high profitability, AI is essential. You can't say, like in the old days, well, great, you want to buy this apparel, please fill in this form, send it off to the underwriters, and we might or might not call you or email you. The only solution is technology, and it has to be done. And also we've seen a lot in the MarTech space where financial data, spend data, where people buy, for how many times, how much, is really creating a significant improvement. But again, for those that are familiar with MarTech, these things have to happen in milliseconds for the high trading performance advertising world. And therefore, AI and machine learning is essential. It actually doesn't function without it.
Seen some interesting ones. China's a place you should all go and visit, because they sort of like walk into the shop and don't have a pay under pay out, and just be present next to a vending machine is all done in China in a daily experience. It's phenomenal over there. And so other ways of looking at propensity to be a crim as well, propensity to shoplift and everything. There's a whole lot of AI techniques on these checkoutless stores in China. So AI, it's a often overhyped thing. As I did machine learning at university, where we basically got it to add up a little bit better. It didn't really do much when the languages like Prolog were coming around. I couldn't really see more value other than some twee things. But now, because you've got the horsepower of say Amazon and Google and others, so you can run decent models, and you don't have to have all that infrastructure. There's great things on decisioning is a key thing, and the feedback loop in decisioning is huge, because if you just got a model working, you get the situation where I can't remember the thing is one of the Goldman traders a few years back didn't have the red button, and it couldn't handle a particular fast market, and boom, his trading book went right the way down. A lot of the machine learning models, because you've got the feedback loops coming in, it's a much better sort of environment for decisioning on insurance, on pricing, on product, all those type of areas. And then you've got on the other end of it, use it on logistics, on route planning, payments planning, so payment routing, all those infrastructure pieces too. And the big one is fraud. That's a massive one, because of propensity to default, propensity to claim, propensity to be a crim, have all got certain tails around it, and using that data can really help you define what is called the right customer, and the right customer is a non-fraudulent customer.
Thank you. We've run out of time for this first session. I would sincerely like to thank Alex, Andries, and Nigel for your insights, having shared your insights and experiences with us. We will be sending along all of the questions from the participants to the panelists following the conference. So the BAI Summer School on the Practice of Data Science in Banking and Finance, which we'll be holding in Bayonne and Biarritz in France, of course, this July 4th to 13th. With the support of many of today's panelists, we firmly believe that this can provide a valuable addition to your experience and skill set moving forward. We will look at the transformation of banking and finance, the applied data science in fintech, the work of a data science team, these questions that we've been discussing on digital ethics, as well as putting it all together and actually working through an integrative case study.
Excellent, and that should be a really great summer school, and I encourage everybody to subscribe, attend, whether it's in person or virtual, depending upon the COVID situation. If you could advance the slide, Lee, and I have one pitch myself. Advancing. So Future Grasp is a company while it's advancing. We are also going to be running what we're calling a winter school in Colorado, in the mountains of Colorado, January 4 to 6. This is a screenshot from the website. It's not yet live, the website, but we will be going live in the next month once we get our confirmed speakers. The premise of this is technology implications on international relations. So it cuts to the core of all the multiple circles in the Venn diagram that Future Grasp addresses, looking at the implications of emerging technology, not just embedded finance and fintech, but also AI, biotech, and several other things on international relations. There'll be government attendees, there'll be corporate attendees, there'll be venture capital, there'll be investors. And so once we get this gone live, I'm more than happy to share it with everyone on the website and the signups, and I would be thrilled to see you here in Colorado post-pandemic times. So move to the last slide if you could, Lee.
Then,
There we are. So in closing now, Lee and I would like to again thank all the expert panelists and attentive attendees today. We learned much about finance as a service, and I hope sincerely we can all transition this into future collaborations among us all. Lee and I will be in contact again soon with a webinar recording and a final white paper summarizing the event today. From my perspective, signing off from the United States and Colorado, again, it's been a thrill to work with everybody today, and I look forward to engaging in the future.
with the insight and experience of our panelists, we hope to have convinced you of the potential of using embedded finance to strengthen the retail industry's business and operating models, to better understand the customer journey, and to better manage organizational ecosystems. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any specific questions or challenges. On behalf of Tom and all of the panelists, we'd like to thank you for participating. Please keep safe and talk soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day, wherever you are.